That's interesting that Marino is going against the three supervisors.
I know.
Supervisor Chris.
Wendy ask you.
Yeah. He doesn't think mass mandate is necessary. Frankly, our community sees an arbitrary and capricious moving forward with this without support.
I was talking to one of my mentors, and she's the one that brought my attention to that. And she was not happy about that.
No.
She was like, he's a doctor, for God's sake. It doesn't matter that people are going to the hospital, are not going to the hospital and dying. Like, we're trying to prevent people from being sick, period, for like a month at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole fact about not being able to taste my food for a month.
Okay, I'm going to start the meeting. This is Carrie Tice, and I am on behalf of Bobby Richards and myself and the ad hoc committee. This is the Fire and Ambulance Workshop, and we're so pleased that people are attending. The format for today's meeting is going to be that Chief Paul Tomasi with our police department is going to be giving a presentation about the history and the current situation of our fire and ambulance services. And then we will have a discussion and questions. So we have quite a nice presentation. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the end, and then I will call on you as you raise your hands or wave at me, as they say in Zoom language here. So we have several people that are going to be participating in this workshop today. As I mentioned, Paul Tomasi is the Chief of Police. We also have Chip Rearig, the City Administrator. We have the Monterey Fire Chief, Chief Panholzer here. And we have somebody from the Ambulance Services, Dave Jednick. So we have all the factions represented here. And we also have our ad hoc committee members, which have been nice to volunteer their time and take a deep dive into our fire and ambulance services. And they are longtime resident Bill Doolittle, CR Representative Tim Toomey, Marianne Schicketents, who is a local here, her house is very near to the Mission Trail Park. So she has concerns about fire abatement. And Molly Dottie, who is also a local resident who works for FEMA. So she is very familiar with emergency responses. So at this time, I'm going to say, Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Councilmember Tice, and thank you, the community members that showed up to take part in this. We're glad you're here. This is an important topic for the city. So again, it's an opportunity for, as we look at it, as improvement through community involvement. Can I get the next slide? As our council member, somebody is not muted.
Yeah, if you can just, if everyone can make sure to mute their microphones, that would be great. Here's some report. All serious reactions.
There we go. Okay, this is a council appointed ad hoc committee, and as mentioned, it's made up of 2 council members, our Mayor Pro Tem Bobby Richards and Council Member Carrie Tice, and then 4 residents, which were read off by Councilmember Tice. This committee has met 3 times already for educational purposes. And the meetings took place to meet with myself, the Director of Public Safety, and our Fire Chief, Gordon Panholzer, and also a meeting with our Monterey Fire Captains and our Carmel Fire Ambulance employees. And with that information and they got a good background of our services. Next slide, please. The role of this ad hoc committee is to do two things. One is to provide direction to council on our current fire contract language. Our current contract expires June 30, 2022. So we're looking for community involvement for specific things we want to see in our new contract moving forward. It's also to explore potential improvements to our ambulance operations, and we'll get to that in a little bit as we proceed. Next slide. Before I get going with our current setup, I want to talk to you a little bit about a very important date in Carmel history. That date was January 1st, 2012. Prior to January 1st, 2012, the city had its own fire department with Carmel employees operating the fire station. We also had an ambulance that operated out of our fire station through a joint powers authority known as Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance. On January 1st, 2012, we no longer had our own employees operating our fire engines. We switched over to contract services with Monterey. Many, if not all, or close to, of the Carmel employees who were firefighters became Monterey employees. The patch on their shoulder changed. The services did not diminish, and to this date, most people don't realize we do not have our own employees operating our fire engine. Also on that date, we no longer had a joint powers authority to operate an ambulance out of our fire station. To retain our ambulance services for this community, the city hired 6 paramedics who are also firefighters to operate an ambulance. So we have Carmel employees who are firefighters and paramedics operating our ambulance to continue that service. Next slide. So what that looked like was the top slide here with the white ambulance represents December 31st, 2011. We were Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance. The next day below that, we became Carmel Fire Ambulance. And we had our own employees. To the right of here, you had Carmel Fire, which was our employees, Carmel employees. At the very next day, in the lower picture, you see 2 firefighters, one of them being a former Carmel firefighter, now a Monterey firefighter operating our fire engine. The fire station still says Carmel-by-the-Sea Fire Station, and our equipment still says Carmel Fire. The only thing that changed was the patch on the shoulder. Next slide. The command structure that took place on that day involves the director of public safety, the chief of police, me, overseeing 6 firefighter paramedics who operate our ambulance. It also involves 9 firefighters working out of our fire station, which are Monterey employees, obviously overseen by Monterey Fire Chief Panholzer. To my knowledge and anybody else's knowledge, we are the only city, probably in California, if not the country, that has a police chief overseeing firefighter, paramedic, and ambulance operation. That's unique, but Carmel has a lot of unique qualities, and that's one of them. Next slide. So as we talk about the fire contract, which we know is expiring June 30th, 2022, the contract we have in existence is over 80 pages long. The ad hoc has reviewed it and looked at all the things that the fire department does. Essentially, what the fire department does, if you take away a lot of the other services, is they respond to all fires, all medical calls, and all hazardous situations in our city. They also provide coverage on our ambulance during vacancies. They can put an EMT, which is an emergency medical technician, or a paramedic on our ambulance to help fill vacancies. They provide training, station management, equipment maintenance, staffing, inspections, and administrative support for the fire services run out of our station. Again, they provide a fire engine on all medical calls. For that service, for 2021, we have budgeted $2.8 million. Next slide. Our fire services, again, being done by Monterey Fire, is made up of a single fire engine, which responds every day. It's a 3-person crew. It's made up of a captain, a firefighter, and an engineer, all of them being emergency medical technicians or paramedics. And I'll get to that a little bit more later. They work a 48-hour schedule. That's 2 days on and 4 days off. One of the reasons that the council wanted to go with contract services with Monterey was due to the resources they could provide for fires and other emergencies in our city. We know over the past 10 years of this contract life that we've had a number of major structure fires and incidents, and Monterey has provided those additional resources which we did not have when we had our own fire station. The service level has been great, and we love our fire services, and we want to look for ways to improve it, but we have no problem with the response that they've provided. Next slide. So I talked a little bit already about an EMT and a paramedic, and this is important information. An EMT is an emergency medical technician. They provide you with basic life support. All firefighters are EMTs. Monterey, on October 28th, 2018, did something new. They created their own paramedic service provider agreement with the county. And what that means is they can put a paramedic on a fire engine, a trained paramedic, the same paramedic you will find on an ambulance. So we have the ability to put a paramedic to respond on calls. Next slide.
Who knows?
Our ambulance operations, again, provides responses to all emergency calls. When you call for a fire, a medical, or a hazardous situation, they're going to respond with our fire engine. They are firefighters and paramedics. They provide a paramedic on all calls. In fact, all of our Carmel employees who are firefighters are paramedics. All 6 of them are paramedics, so we can ensure you are getting a paramedic on a call. The ambulance operation is managed by 3 different departments. As I mentioned earlier, they fall under my direction, the police chief. They're also managed by Monterey Fire for station management and fire training and incident command for fires. They also fall under the management of the County Emergency Medical Services, who oversees the paramedic licensing policies and procedures. Okay. For that, the residents will pay this year, we budgeted $1.54 million for ambulance services. Next slide. So our ambulance services, much like our fire department, responds with 1 ambulance with Carmel employees. It's a 2-person ambulance crew made up of a firefighter and paramedic. They work the same schedule as our fire department. It's 48 hours on with 2 days on, 48-hour schedule, 2 days on and 4 days off. Again, vacancies on our ambulance are covered by Monterey Fire through an agreement or overtime by our own employees. Next slide. This is an important slide because we love our fire services, and having the ability to have an ambulance in our city is a great thing. It's our golden ticket. Why? Because we provide a fast service when you need it. If you call us for a fire, a medical, or a hazardous situation, you are getting not only your fire engine, but our ambulance responding to your house in 3 minutes. You will not find a faster service than that. 3 minutes. The county's response would be 8 minutes, and you're getting response in 3 minutes. And as we know, in any medical situation, like a heart attack or a stroke, minutes matter. So we love our ambulance, we love our fire department because of that service. Next slide. Something that could impact that response time, though, is a mutual aid agreement we entered into in 2013. This is not a bad thing. This is a good agreement for the city in a number of ways, and the county. It's beneficial for both. The city in 2013 recognized that there are residents just outside our borders who need medical care. Our ambulance was found to be the closest available ambulance to get to people who need help. The city entered into an agreement with the county to put auto vehicle locators on our ambulances so we could be incorporated in the deployment of county ambulances. We can be called upon if someone in Mission Fields, for example, is having a heart attack or a stroke, and we can get there in 4 or 5 minutes where the county can get there in 8. Those 3 minutes make a huge difference. That also means that if we're tied up on a call or outside the city and we need help in our city, the county provider, which is AMR, will come in and help our residents. So we won't go without an ambulance. It might be a little bit slower response, but you're still gonna get an ambulance responding to your house. Next slide. What that looks like. Last year, during 2021, we responded to 321 medical calls in Carmel-by-the-Sea. During that same time frame, I have it covered up. If I recall, it's 835. Am I right? Yes. 800, I had to move my margin there. We respond to 835 calls in the county, part of that mutual aid agreement. That means most of our calls were outside of our city, and that extends us from Marina, mostly around the point in the peninsula, to Kashawa, Carmel Valley, and all the way down to Big Sur. We can get called. So it's a commitment that we've made to the residents outside our city to respond to them. Next slide. When we look at that same time frame and how that impacts the residents of Carmel-by-the-Sea, during that time frame, there were 62 Carmel calls, emergency medical calls in our city that we could not respond to. With the mutual aid agreement, American Medical Response, the county provider, was able to respond to those calls. Next slide. So what that looks like. Again, we love our fire services because you're getting a fire engine to your house on a medical call. The fire engine is currently equipped with emergency medical technicians, not paramedics. They are responding and they can provide basic life support. For those 62 residents that did not get our ambulance because we were occupied, your response time was delayed. You had the county provider showing up a minute or 2 later or longer to provide you with a paramedic. As we know, if you're having a heart attack or a stroke, minutes matter. Next slide. So as we started this, the ad hoc has been given a role, and that is to provide direction to council on 2 things. One is the current fire contract language. How do we look at this contract and improve our services in the community? The second one is to explore potential improvements to the ambulance operation. How do we improve paramedic services in this community to those 62 people that had a delayed response, those 62 people that are paying for an ambulance? How do we improve that, the healthcare and the services to those people while maintaining the services outside the city? Next slide. That's where we're at. That is a current overview of our operation, how we're set up, how we're managed, and how we respond to calls. We want to open up this right now to really questions and a discussion through the ad hoc. If you would, please use your reactions tab on the bottom to raise your hand, and Councilmember Tice will call on you. I'll be taking notes, and I know Yvette's taking notes to any questions that we have to answer. If we can't answer the question tonight, we're going to take it down and we'll answer it next week at our next meeting, and we'll get there. If you don't want to ask a question tonight and maybe are uncomfortable in this setting, we have the link. It's cityclerk@ci.carmel.ca.us. Just email your questions or comments to that address, and we will review them, and we'll have a response, much like we do during the budget process. Next week, we'll have some answers for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Councilmember Tice to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Great presentation. Great overview. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but we got to start somewhere, right? Do people in the audience, if you would raise your hands, I'm happy to call on you if you have questions. If not, I may have Chip, our city administrator. Would you please add a few comments at this time?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Councilmember Tice. I agree. Great presentation by Chief Tomasi. Thank you. We are here to answer any questions. This is again a program, as the chief said at the beginning of his presentation. At the end, we're looking for questions and feedback. Ultimately, the ad hoc committee will have at least one more meeting before making a recommendation on improvements to our existing fire contract with Monterey Fire, and then opportunities for service improvements or enhancements with our paramedic service. They'll be making a recommendation to council for the council to consider, probably at their October meeting at this point in time. As Chief Tomasi said, we're very proud of our fire service. This is so much stronger than mutual aid or auto aid. We are one fire department with numerous stations from the airport, 3 stations in the city of Monterey, 1 in Pacific Grove, and obviously 1 here. So we have a system where we have Chief Panholzer has built a program that is automated so that when anyone is responding from the Carmel station, we get a new engine here. You know, the question that came up, Councilmember Tice, which I think is really pertinent to me from my perspective, and actually I think Chief Tomasi spoke to one of the individuals who created the current agreement that we're working under, retired Councilmember Gerard Rose just recently, and the question was if Monterey had a paramedic program in 2012, when we went into the reciprocal fire relationship that we currently have, would it have been logical to also have had them take over our paramedic services as well? And we believe that would have been the case. We don't have crystal balls. We weren't in the discussions.
Chip, I'm going to have to interrupt. I'm so sorry. This is Yvette. We're having an issue with Zoom, and it's going to say that it's telling me that we're going to time out. So if we lose everyone, we are working on it.
Okay, so we'll have to log back in. We had this issue. I thought we had it fixed.
Yeah, they're currently working on it right now, but just in case, I'm sorry to interrupt.
we at like 24 or something?
We were at 28.
28?
So we're at 23.
And Jerry's iPhone had his hand raised.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
We'll get to Jerry in just a minute.
Thank you.
We're gonna let Chip finish up his comments, and then I'll get to Jerry's question.
Thank you, council member, and I apologize. Zoom seems to be updating its software platform on every machine at every turn. So the meeting timed out. We apologize for that technical difficulty, and we're trying to fix it. So we've got 40 minutes left, and we're working on extending it if beyond 40 minutes, certainly, if we need to. I think where I was, Councilmember Tice, upon questioning, we spoke to Gerard Rose, Councilmember Rose, recently, and the question that, and he was involved in the negotiations. Councilmember Rose was a council member, and he was also a board member of Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance, CRFA. And so he was integral in creating the relationship that we're currently working under. And again, the question that was posed to me and Chief Panholzer and Chief Tomasi by one of the ad hoc committee members was, if Monterey had a paramedic program in 2012, would not it have been logical to have allowed Monterey or negotiated with the city of Monterey to also assume our paramedic ambulance service? Councilmember Rose has said absolutely. That would have been something that would have been considered and discussed and negotiated at that point in time. And again, so that was a question that was posed by one of the ad hoc board members, and I just wanted to report that. As Chief Tomasi said, we love our fire service, we love our paramedic service. There is no intention of eliminating our paramedic service within the city, but the ad hoc committee, which will eventually make a recommendation to the city council on service enhancements and opportunities, is looking at whether there are opportunities to further enhance our paramedic service. I think I'll stop there, Councilmember Tice. I know Jerry's cell phone had his hand up. I think we received an email from him as well. I'm
Yes.
finished unless there are questions of me, ma'am.
Go ahead. Thanks, Chip. Go ahead, Jerry. We welcome your question.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate the time today and the effort being put into this major project that's ongoing. I just would like to know what are some of the recommendations so far to enhance the ambulance service? There's just a lot of things floating around right now. If someone could kind of put their finger on it, I think would be helpful for many of us that are listening in.
Paul, do you want to, so we have this workshop that was going to be, the presentation, the introduction, the review of these services. And then the next meeting, we were going to discuss the goals and some suggestions that the ad hoc has brought to the surface. So we can kind of leak a few things, can't we, Paul?
What the fuck is that?
Oh, I think that was Tim Maroney, who used to be a police officer here and the building official. But let me answer Mr. Jerry's question. Mr. Jerry, some of the fire contract issues that have been discussed, again, nothing's been decided on the part of council. Council is the body that will ultimately renegotiate the fire contract and look at these opportunities. Some of the issues were having firefighters rather than retired annuitants do the mandatory multifamily and commercial inspections. Another was to continue to have Chief Panholzer and his team work on fire fuel load reduction, especially in our preserve and Pescadero Canyon. Of course, part of the city is in what we call a high fire severity zone. That portion adjacent to Pebble Beach, mostly in the northeast neighborhood. Increased and continued community outreach and education of the community. What can private property owners do to reduce the risks of wildland fire and fire in the city on private property? One of the other items was beach fire enforcement. Right now, we've got police officers doing that. Wouldn't it be more logical to have firefighters educating people who have fires in our approved beach fire devices? And then, as Chief Tomasi suggested again, management opportunities for the paramedic service and paramedic service enhancements. So those are some of the things, sir, that were discussed initially by the group.
Thank you, Chip, but I kind of was pretty specific, I thought, on the ambulance service recommendations, if there are any so far.
There are none so far, sir. And as again, Councilmember Tice was suggesting, we're still in this process. So the ad hoc committee spent a lot of time understanding the historical background of how we got to where we are today, and then we'll be eventually making a recommendation to the council for their consideration in the near future.
So we're looking, Jerry, for public input at this point. In terms of the fire contract, what does the public feel are services that they'd like to see Monterey Fire take on? And in terms of the ambulance contract, ambulance services, how can we improve the services? There is, we want to improve the services, keep the services, and how can we better service the public with our ambulance, if there is a way to do that? And that's really the question at hand. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Marianne?
For those of us on the ad hoc committee that are not on the city council or as involved in the day-to-day administrative operations, it would be really good to hear from the public if you have been involved, especially if you have been involved on that topic before. What are your questions? For us, it was an incredible learning curve to understand how our ambulance operates. And it would be very good to hear the public's questions or the public's understanding of how the ambulance works in order for us to make a better recommendation.
Thank you. Tim, Toomey, you had your hand up? Oh, I'll get to you, Carolyn, in a moment.
Yeah, just to emphasize what Marianne said, that what we're looking for is information from the public, how any, misconceptions or misunderstandings or, just trying to get all the information and feedback from the public. I think, Paul's presentation, high leveled it, but as we were digging into, a deeper dive, I mean, there were, some things that just from my perspective became really important. The fact that, just the importance of paramedics and, how that plays into the timing of everything, where it doesn't matter how they arrive at your door. They could be, coming in a pickup truck, but they're going to provide a level of service that's, just like being in the hospital. So, those and then the mutual aid, are there any considerations with that? Maybe the scope of it. As Chief Paul said, looking at the overall, management opportunities between the two. But I was also going to say, Jerry, that it might be helpful to lay out just kind of at a high level the next steps for the fire contract, the timing, and some of the decision points on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Molly, did you have your hand up? And then I'll go to Carolyn.
I actually did not, Carrie. I can wait. Thank
All right.
you.
Go ahead, Carolyn. Thank you for raising your hand.
Sure. It's, I've got a lot of background on fire and ambulance services going back to 2010, long before I had been on city council. And I think I know that one of the issues that it's really the elephant in the room is the cost of these services. And we're not even addressing that today. I know we're talking about level of services, but when you're talking about cost of services and what you're looking for is trying to reduce the amount of overtime that's put in on the ambulance, and having to fill in with people who have already worked their shifts. The idea of going to the Monterey Fire Department, who are now have all the paramedics on board to fill in or even work the ambulance, makes a whole lot of sense to reduce the amount of overtime and cost that the ambulance costs us. Going back to 2011, when the city council approved the contract to go with Monterey, it was Ken Talmadge who said, we're going to keep our ambulance employees because we're going to run the ambulance like a business. And that was kind of naive at the time, but of course, 2020 hindsight is clear. And I don't mean to Monday morning quarterback this, but at that time, the competition for Monterey was that CAL FIRE had a paramedic system, and it was Andrew Miller's vision to also be able to have a paramedic program. And the fact that Monterey now has this paramedic program is a tribute to Chief Panholzer, who's put that vision together over all these years. And at that time, back in 2010, 2011, when all the discussion and politics was going on between the fire departments and the cities, at that time, our paramedics were not, as I recall, were not cross-trained as firefighters, but that came later. And they very much wanted to become part of the Monterey department because they were going to get a raise if they did that. But our city held back those 6 employees, much probably to their consternation at that time. And now I think that this ad hoc committee should look at having Monterey staff the ambulance, which means we could still maintain our ambulance rights to run an ambulance out of our fire station. And the other thing, the other aspect of that mutual aid, auto aid agreement with the county that AMR shares is because there was a time in the politics that we were going to be cut off from serving the mouth of the valley and outside of Carmel. And the idea of having this mutual aid meant it was a way to offset the cost of running an ambulance. It was never going to make money and it was never going to be a profitable business. But looking at the being able to go outside of Carmel and respond to calls meant that we could reduce the cost of running an ambulance for our own residents. So if there's another way to reduce the cost of running an ambulance now, I'm thinking it might be that it's time, since you are negotiating a new contract with Monterey for the next 10 years and looking at level of service, have Monterey staff our ambulance. And they would have a much, much larger pool now because of their paramedic program to be able to staff that ambulance without paying a whole lot of overtime. And I think you're at about $300,000 on overtime just for the ambulance. So I think that's one of the elephants in the room here that, you may be getting to that eventually. And obviously it's a city council decision when it comes to the money. But that is a consideration as far as levels of service too. And I think, kudos to Chief Panholzer and Paul Tomasi for, there's finally paramedics, far more paramedics, and our own paramedics cross-trained as firefighters then got a raise because they're taking on the extra job of can be also a firefighter. So I don't know where the city stands with salaries on those things, but when you get to 1.54 million just to run an ambulance, then that's when you ought to be looking at how can we maintain the rights, keep an ambulance nearby, but reduce the cost of staffing it. So those are some of my thoughts about where this ad hoc committee should focus some attention. Thank you, Carrie, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, you've had quite the history and have had the opportunity to dive deep into this issue. So
Yeah.
I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, it's been many years.
Yes.
Thank you.
Chip, I think Carolyn's right about the overtime for ambulance. It's about 300,000, isn't it, a year?
Yes, ma'am. That's approximately correct. I don't have the budget book in front of me, but yes, I believe that's approximately budgeted. Yes, ma'am. And spent.
Yeah. So one other issue that came up as the ad hoc committee was talking to Chief Panholzer, to the ambulance, Dave Jednett, was the issue of one option would be hiring a director of ambulance. And so that is one option that has been the ad hoc has taken into consideration. And we've asked the staff to take a look at what the cost of that would be. So we're currently looking at that option and trying to figure out if that is a good option when you compare it to what Carolyn brought up in terms of our ambulance employees become Monterey Fire, and we're still keeping our services. Bobby, did you? Yes, go ahead.
Quickly, I think that someone asked about timing.
Oh, yes.
We begin our budget process in January of every year. That said, it's been the council's objective, and I think the ad hoc committee's objective as well, to continue working on this through the end of the calendar year so that we can have some good information to council as we enter negotiations for the updated fire contract with Monterey Fire. So time is of the essence, and as Chief Panholzer has suggested, Chief Tomasi has suggested, the existing contract extension does expire on June 30th of 2022 with Monterey Fire. So it's fully our intention to have a revised contract signed, sealed, and delivered well before that date.
Thank you. Bobby, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, one of the things we were looking at too is there any duplication of efforts by paramedics, firefighters, or management? So that was another thing that we talked about. And I think that it was interesting to find out about the calls that were brought into this town, the 60, I think it was 63. And so that, what I would like to see out of this meeting, or these meetings, is that those 63 calls all have the level of service that our ambulance currently gives. And that was something that I would love to, out of this meeting that came about, that I would love to see all of the calls have the same level of service that our paramedics offer. And so there might be some training situations that we could offer, or some other things like that. But we're going to have some goals, and what we're looking for is public participation to help us with these goals so that we can make a solid recommendation to the council. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Bobby. I'm going to go to Dave Jednett, and then I'll go to Marianne. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Councilwoman Tice. And I appreciate the input from Ms. Hardy. I just want to set the record straight with regards to the switch over from Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance to the City of Carmel. The employees of Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance were dual role. They were paramedic firefighters when we came over. And it was the intention of the city, as Gerard mentioned, to maintain our 201 rights and maintain the operation for our ambulance. At the time, Monterey did not have a paramedic program, and since then they have started one, which is a great advantage to the citizens of Monterey, and they are slowly building that up, and it's growing as well. We definitely benefit from utilizing their help when they're available to backstaff our ambulance, and their individuals sacrifice a lot to help keep that ambulance running 24/7. Sometimes it's impossible due to staffing. We used to, the City of Carmel, when we switched over from Carmel Regional Fire Ambulance to the city, At the time, we had several part-time paramedic employee firefighters that also helped offset. Those positions since eroded and were subsequently not backfilled. The $300,000 budget for overtime, which has been a bone of contention over the last year, I feel, is dramatically impacted by the vacancy that occurred almost 4 years ago. And so I think it's not, I don't feel that it's really fair to look at this from a number issue in terms of a level of service issue. When it comes down to the city of Carmel, we are in a unique position that we have the ability to maintain a transport ambulance where no other city on the peninsula can do that. Very few cities throughout the state of California are allowed to do that. So when we look at the total, aspect of what the service level is to the citizens of Carmel, we got to take that into consideration. For the 62 calls that outside agencies responded to, keep in mind, AMR is not the only agency that comes to Carmel. Monterey County Regional also comes, if they're closer or not, and that's set up through dispatch agreements and stuff like that. Mining down into those calls, quite frankly, those aren't all life-threatening medical emergencies. Those could be cancellations. So there's lots of other things associated with that. So I think it's really important as a whole, especially since it's the first public meeting and that the public is actually getting a chance to see what you guys have already kind of heard from your learning sessions. I think it's important that we look at this in depth and not come to any, rush judgment on what may or may not be good or what may have been possible 10 years ago, but didn't come to fruition. So that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for that perspective, which is important. Mary Ann?
I just wanted to let everyone know, let you know that there's a message in the chat box from Mr. Maroney. If he's still here, maybe he would want to speak to that. Otherwise, maybe somebody can read it.
I'm sorry, Mary Ann, I had a hard time hearing you. What did you say?
There is a message from Mr. Maroney in the chat box.
Yes.
That maybe someone should read unless he's still here.
So that was I read the message. It's hard for us as a city entity to take public comment from a chat box. We have to be kind of careful about that. So that's what I was referring to when somebody has suggested that we have an extra position and that the staff are looking at the finances to that. So Chip, go ahead.
Yeah, council member, we will certainly, we will add that to the discussion for next week and have any kind of a response, but we've logged that. This is the kind of format that we use for our budget, where people are able to offer anything up, any suggestions. And again, Chief Tomasi and I are trying to take copious notes here. And if there's clarification, if there's opportunities for us to respond, and certainly questions, we'll be prepared to do that next Tuesday at the same time.
That's right.
And then I have one more question for Mr. Jedniak. He who said we are in the unique position as a city to have our own ambulance transport. I would like to know what are the benefits of that. What would be the difference for us having our own transport versus like the fire engines being managed by another entity?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think this last year probably proved the most valuable for the city of Carmel having its own ambulance, seeing how the county system was so greatly impacted by COVID. They're impacted by the hospitals being full, and ambulances were unable to drop patients, which put a burden on the system, which reduced resources available, which extended response times to many areas throughout the county. It also created an opportunity for us to help out our county, the county provider. More so, I think this last year, we responded to more calls into the cities of Monterey, Seaside, Pacific Grove, and Marina than I've ever seen in my 36 years of providing service for the city of Carmel. So when you have your own ambulance, that gives you the resource to have the ability to transport the stroke patient, the patient having an acute heart attack, the trauma patient very rapidly. Those types of emergencies have time is tissue, and those patients need that rapid transport. They don't need to be waiting on scene. Even having a paramedic on scene for those types of patients and waiting for an ambulance is still detrimental to those patients. So that's why it's an extremely valuable asset that we currently have.
Can you please explain why that ambulance would be slower or how it would be impacted? My understanding is it's the same ambulance in the same fire station, just that the management is different, or is that a wrong conception on my part?
I think we're talking about two different subject matters here. The management of the ambulance and having the ambulance. I understood your first question is, why is it important to have our own ambulance? If there was a management side to that, then at this point, I'm not prepared to speak to that. But in terms of the city's unique ability to have and operate its own ambulance is a very, it's as some people said, it's, the golden goose, so to speak.
I'm going to go to James Rossen. He has his hand up, and then Carolyn again.
Thank
Hi,
you.
James.
Thank you. This is James Rossen. I've been a board member of the Carmel Highlands Fire Protection District for 15 years. So I've had a chance to talk to Dave Jadiak and Carolyn on many of these issues. I'm delighted to see that you're working with Monterey, and Monterey is putting paramedics on their engines and possibly extending it to yours. All of CAL FIRE in our local battalion, which is Highlands, Cypress, which is surrounding the city of Carmel, and Pebble Beach, put paramedics on our engines because the county contract for ambulance was so terrible, especially when WestMed was there. So we are very dependent upon the Carmel City ambulance for proper service. We've been watching the county contract with horror as what has gone on with their latest RFP. And again, we are working with that, and everybody needs to be aware that the county ambulance contract is quite deficient and in limbo at this point. We're dealing with AMR on a temporary 1-year contract, I believe, extension. So that affects a bit what happens in the Carmel. And the attitude seems to be that the county contract wants to eliminate the Carmel ambulance and the Carmel Valley ambulance, which would greatly affect all of the response times in the entire county. I think you're correct to be dealing with Monterey and the services they can provide. Additionally, I have some other information. My son is a firefighter paramedic in San Ramon Valley. Everybody that's hired there, and there are 168 personnel, is a firefighter paramedic. And they provide all of the ambulance service and fire protection for their district. And the personnel work on the same 2 days on, 4 days off, and alternate commonly 1 week on the ambulance, 1 week on the fire vehicle. So that system can work very well, and I've studied that and seen how that can work. But in ending, I think that you should be realizing that a lot of your calls are coming from the CAL FIRE district surrounding the city of Carmel, and the 3 fire departments, Pebble Beach Community Service District, Cypress Fire District, and Highlands should be included in some of your discussions to help out with some of the answers here. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Good input. Carolyn, go ahead.
Well, it's nice to see James here and talking to the subject. He had many, many, many years of experience on the Carmel Highlands Fire Protection District Board. So it's nice to see him again. I was actually, he's the person that could talk to this better than I, but certainly they've relied on our ambulance for transport, but they've always been running a paramedic on their engines for years. And so to address Mary Ann's concern or question, I think if you have paramedics on your engines, the transport is not quite as critical to be there right at that moment. But like Dave Jednak can tell you with all his years of experience, there are those stroke victims or heart attack victims that need quick transport. But having a paramedic on our fire engines would make a big difference in reliance on the ambulance being there. The ambulance then is for the purposes of transport. And secondly, I had personal experience some years ago with regard to an ambulance call at my house, and it was AMR that showed up for the call, and I didn't see any difference in service level. There wasn't a delay. They were just as professional. So to address Councilmember Richards' concerns about service, that I think at that time, I think it's a good point to make sure that this mutual aid, it's the same level of service, but I didn't find any difference personally between the two. And I have had AMR respond a couple of times. So I just wanted to add that little bit to your conversation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Chip.
Yes, and just thanks to Mr. Rossen for his comments. And just to be really clear, neither the council nor the ad hoc committee has had any discussion about discontinuing our ambulance or paramedic service within the village. But they're looking at service enhancement opportunities. So we will have an ambulance in the future. We will have full paramedic service, the higher level of care that Chief Tomasi described in the future. Those were sacrosanct in all the discussions.
And we're very, the fact that we have a fire station with an ambulance bay, definitely emphasizes that point. So we're very fortunate with that. Chief Panholzer, are you on? Are you still on?
I am here, yes.
Did you want to make any comments or thoughts at this time?
No, I think there's been some very good discussion, and I appreciate the input and I appreciate the positive comments about the service level, because we do strive to provide a high level of service. We are open to any suggestions or ideas, and are excited about revisiting the contract and renegotiating the language in the contract to add the enhancements that you're looking for. And so, we're in this for the long haul with you guys.
Thank you. So the plan is, at this time, we have our meeting next week at the same time. So it's Tuesday, September 21st, same time, 4:30, and it's going to be a Zoom meeting. And we're going to take these comments. We're going to synthesize these into a question and answer session, and get some goals out to everybody. So that we wanted to spur the topic on with this education, and then continue the discussion next week when we take a look at answering these questions and some of these options in a more concrete way. All right, Molly?
I just want to add one last thought, and that is, as a member of the ad hoc committee, one of the things that I've been, holding in the back of my mind the whole time is, how do we maintain the quality of service that Carmel residents want, while at the same time looking for cost efficiencies or other kinds of efficiencies that will make the whole system work better. Because we have a lot of demands on our staff, a lot of demands on our dollars, and not enough of either to go around for all of the really important and critical needs of Carmel residents. So I just want to express that that we're holding both of those values and not wanting to sacrifice certainly quality of service or people's safety on the altar of saving money. But if there are ways that we can create those efficiencies and save some dollars and deploy those dollars in other ways that will benefit Carmel residents, that's the intent.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bill Doolittle, did you have any comments at this time? Another member of the ad hoc?
Mike, yes. Thank you for reaching out here. My initial response here is, of course, considering taking into account the costs of the overtime that is running a fairly high level versus what it would cost to add a rotating fifth person through the process. So the comparison there needs to be studied and that to come up with an answer that we should then decide upon.
Yeah, as part of the facts borne out through this process. Thank you. Tim, anything to add?
No, I really appreciate all the input from the public. A lot of good information, and actually a lot of folks on the call have got a lot of experience behind this. So it definitely helps us out. And to echo what Molly said, we're really looking at, maintaining, a safe program and at the same time, taking a look at the cost structure and to identify, any efficiencies that we can come up with. And, we'll continue to do that. There were a couple of ideas that came out from a couple of the folks here on the call. I think it might have been Carolyn. As we look at the mutual aid, there's a financial component to that, that helps out. But no, I really appreciate the opportunity here to get this input, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to go back to Paul and see if you have any, final comments after hearing what people had to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Tice. No, actually, I thought there were a lot of good questions that came up, a lot of concern, and this is, as we started, this is a big topic for the city. And I want to go back to something that Gerard Rose said earlier to me. Our intentions should be always to provide the best service possible for the care of this community. And if our hearts are in the right place, we'll end up making the right decisions for this community. And that should be our guiding values. And I appreciate the volunteers who are on this ad hoc committee, who are taking time out of your day and weeks to study this and learn it and get educated and really put some thought into this as we move forward. This is the city's ambulance. This is the city's fire department, and we want to make sure that we provide the best services we can. So I thank you again. And I thank you to the public who showed up and asked questions and provided input. I'm going to ask that Yvette puts the last slide back up before we go, because it has the link to the city clerk's email address. So if anybody has questions after this, just jot it down, send in your questions, and we'll get back next week with those answers. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And Bobby wanted to also say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. Thanks. First off, I want to thank all the people that did participate. There was 4 residents and then Carrie and myself, but also the people that took the time to come meet with us. Chief Panholzer, Chief Tomasi, Dave Jednick, JD Sheldon. There was a series of people that came and spoke to us, and it was really helpful, and we really appreciate the input from all of you. The 2 things that I'd like to get out of this are, if you do have questions, please email us. And also, if you have some suggestions that you think might help us with the ambulance contract, that would be wonderful. And if you have suggestions on what you would like to see in our fire contract, that would be helpful. So you have two contracts that we're dealing with that we'd like input on both. at least one. So thanks everybody, and thank you, Carrie, for doing this meeting, mediating this meeting.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, it's really nice to have the interest of the public for these, you know, emergency services that, you know, we're very fortunate for a small little 1 square mile town to have such wonderful emergency services of our police, our fire, and our ambulance. And they really are dear to our hearts and very important to our citizens and also our visitors. And so it's really with a lot of pride and interest that we want to make sure that we continue the progression of improving services so that our city is well served. So thank you, everybody who came and listened and gave us feedback. And we certainly look forward, I hope the same group and more come back on our next meeting, which is Tuesday, September 21st at 4:30. Anything else? Well, that's not bad for a little over an hour. Nice job, Paul, with the presentation and great feedback from everybody. So at this point, if there's no other questions, I don't see any hands up or anything. I think we can end the meeting. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Yvette, for helping us out.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night.